Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another monthly wrap-up. Be talking about the 8 books that we read in October. And if you don't know me, I'm Voodoo Pickles, and thank you for stopping by. I really appreciate it. So I was really excited. We were able to read 8 books this month. I didn't think we were going to be able to do that. We were running short on some time on some of them, and didn't think it was going to happen. I didn't read all of the horror type books that I wanted to this month, or even the Halloween type books that I was just yeah, but I didn't think to theme it until halfway through the month. So that was my bad. I'm not used to this. So next year Halloween will go all out, and it'll be great. The first book we read this month was called Time of Contempt, and this was written by Andrzej Sapkowski. I am so sorry I butchered that. I read this physically, and it was about 320 pages, and this is the second in the Witcher saga. If you buy the box set of the Witcher saga, this is the second book in that series, and in the overall Witcher series, it is book 4. But I bought the box set, so it is the second book that we read for Witcher, and this one was not as fast-paced as the first one. It was very politic-y. It spent a lot of time in the middle talking about politics and who was scheming, who was doing what with what little area, and I was just like, oh. I felt like when I played Witcher 3, when I'm I just kind of skip through those little dialogue options of just being I want to go hunt things. I want to go hunt down monsters. I want to go do all my contracts. I already have my quest log is so full. I need to go off and do some of these side quests here. I don't need you to tell me this. Write it down. I'll read it later. That's kind of how I felt with this one. It was still really good. Towards the end, it picked up again in the pacing, and it was just, oh, yeah, it was good. Towards the end of the book in this one, after all the politicking, after building up to a lot of the things, we get to see where Ciri is going, and she's still a teenager in this one, so she's not a full-grown adult yet, and all of the mischief she gets into, and I don't know what everybody knows of the Witcher lore in it, but I got a lot of information at the very end, and that was where I was just well, tell me more about this. Tell me more about this. And then the book ended, and I was well, how dare you not tell me more about this? So I'm excited for the third one. I'm kind of hesitant, though. I'm oh, I don't need any more galas and balls and politicking and who wants to sleep with who and who was plotting against who and all of that kind of stuff. That took me out of it a lot. And poor Geralt, he was just at one of these events, he was just kind of okay. He was just there the man was just trying to eat, and they would not let him just eat. And I was this poor dude, I feel you. I feel you. But I gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to continue into the Witcher lore. The second book we read this month was The Last Murder at the End of the World, and this was written by Stuart Turton. And I read this through an audiobook, and the audiobook was about 11 and a half hours, and this one was an interesting one. It just popped up in my library as, hey, you might like this. And I was just damn, if my library does not know me, I really enjoyed this book. This book is a post-apocalyptic murder mystery. And it is, the post-apocalyptic area is on this small island in Greece, or off the coast of Greece, where it is one of the only place, or the only place that we know of in the world that is protected from this black fog that destroys and kills every living creature. And this black fog took over or started like just going across the world and eating away at humans. And so you have your last humans here on this island. And the island is the site of a top-notch research facility before civilization collapsed. And so you have scientists here, and they're just like, yes, we're going to figure out how to do this. And we go through a perspective of one of the people in this village, because there's a village full of little villagers that talk to the people the humans that settled it before. Like, we have these people who were part of this research facility. They are still alive because they created nanobots that were injected into their system, so it repairs their cells and fights off infections and everything, so they're still alive. This is decades after the original collapse of society happened, and they're still alive. And they have a small village that they were able to cultivate, and these villagers, they do all the farming, they do a lot of like the maintenance work, and these people who are from the before times are kind of like teaching them and training them and just kind of mentoring them. And then one of them is found murdered. One of these, they called them the elders. One of these elders are found murdered, and it's up to one of the villagers to find out what happened. And throughout all of this, there is an AI named Abby that is in all of their heads. And it is hearing every single thought from every villager and every elder, and trying to, so you have like a few different perspectives in this, but it was very interesting. By the time I was halfway through the book, I was like, oh, snaps, I understand what they were talking about now. And that thing in like the first chapter, that makes sense right now. And I'm so happy I remembered it. And it was trippy. I was surprised a lot in this, in the little twists and turns and everything. And we didn't get to hear what completely happened until the very, very last chapter of the book. And by that time it happened, I was just like, I've been emotionally manipulated throughout this whole book of what to expect, and it keeps throwing out red herrings and everything. As a murder mystery, it was great. As a post-apocalyptic novel, as it was also great, and the way it combined those two in a way that I was not expecting. And there's a lot of times with characters that I'm just like, oh, why are you being stupid? You're nothing in this book has led me to believe that this is you're not going to be able to connect these dots. I need you to connect the dots. And that takes me out of the reading experience a lot. But in this book, anytime that kind of happened with one of the characters, it gave you a reason of why. And I was just like, oh, you wouldn't though. Yeah. You wouldn't be able to connect those dots because of X, Y, and Z that you explained to me over here. And it was really good. I really enjoyed it. And that was a 4 out of 5. Third book that we read this month was Bright Young Women. And this was written by Jessica Knoll. And I read this digitally through my library, and it was about 376 pages. And this book was not what I thought it was going to be. And that was sad for me. I was going in expecting one thing, and then halfway through the book, I was like, this sounds very familiar. I know these. I know the outline of this story. Like, why do I know that? And then I remembered that this was in like a little controversy video that I listened to on YouTube, and I was like, oh, okay. I get it now. But the synopsis got me a little bit more excited about this book, because the synopsis says, don't miss this breakneck thriller examining our culture's obsession with serial killers and true crime. And this book follows 2 women on the pursuit of justice against all odds, a fascinating look at true crime and tabloid culture that's as thoughtful as it is gripping. I'm masterfully blending elements of psychological suspense and true crime. The book opens on a Saturday night in 1978, hours before the soon-to-be infamous murderer descends upon a Florida sorority house with deadly results. The lives of those who survive, including sorority president and key witness Pamela Schumacher, are forever changed. And I was like, okay, but you can kind of see why I was just like, it's a commentary on our obsession with serial killers and true crime, which I had also listened to a whole nother thing about why, like, women in particular consume a lot of true crime content, and that was by a psychologist. So I was like, you know what, this could be really interesting, and I'm gonna really like it. I did not like it as much. So this is, you don't know, I'm going to tell you now. It's not spoilery. It's apparently the author kind of was like, this is my tribute to the victims of the Ted Bundy murders. And so that's why, like, halfway through, I was like, I know this pattern. Like, what are you talking about? You're like, are you just cherry picking things off of, like, other, like, real serial killers to put in your book? No, she was talking about Ted Bundy in this book and all of the murders, and she's using the real names of a lot of the victims that he had and some of their stories. But once we get past the first part, which is the attack on the sorority house in Florida, once we get past that part, it just kind of goes into this weird, like, having these women connect together emotionally. And we keep going back and forth in time of this one woman and who she's talking with currently in the current times in the 1970s. And then previously, which was like 4 years before, and her relationships with these women and how these women continue to try and seek justice for what's going on. And but at the same time, I'm like, you guys are going through weird channels of how to do this. I don't believe that these make a lot of sense. And then a lot of it did. It shows, like, the incompetence of law enforcement and the unwillingness to listen to women. It really focused on that part, which was a good part to focus on. And then it switched tonally to, now we're going to go into a love story. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? And then it's like, now there's murder. And then we're going to go back to this love story. And then back to how cops won't listen to these women. It was really odd. And then once I was reading, like, these names that I'm like, I know this. I know this. And the way that it was changed, because the killer is never mentioned in the book. It's just the murderer, the killer. He is never named in the book. And it was a weirdly mushed together part. And it feels like it was edited later to be like, oh, we need to be more sensitive to the victims and the victims' families. Which, if you're going to write a book like this about real life people, I think having them more focused and telling their story versus creating other women to focus on their stories and then pushing a love story into it was a little off. I think if she would have taken out the trying to tribute to the victims and just kind of created her own little thing with these other women, it would have been great. It would have been really good. It was the way it ended as well, because he was caught and all of this, it was it felt mushed together. It felt like it was a story that was two stories that were cut up, had a similar pathway, and then mushed together. And it was just odd. It was odd. I read the whole thing. I liked some parts of it. Some parts of it were really informative. Some parts of them I was just like, I understand this. And other parts I was just like, there's no need for this to be in here. There really wasn't a need for this. And so I gave it a 2.5 out of 5. And the fourth book that we read this month was No Rest for the Wicked. And this is written by Cressley Cole. And I read this physically, and it was 384 pages. And this is the third book in the Immortals After Dark series. So after reading Bright Young Women, and I kind of went into this like, I don't know what I want to read. I was getting busy at work, and I was just like, I need something that I enjoy that will pull me out of this reading slump, because there was days between me finishing that book and picking up another book. And so I picked No Rest for the Wicked. This is a part of one of my favorite series. This is the Immortals After Dark series. It's like a romantasy type series, more romance than anything. And what I enjoy about the Immortals After Dark series is these are all immortal type fairy tale creatures. You have vampires, you have demons, you have werewolves, you have the fae, you have like zombies, you have witches and wizards and warlocks and gods and goddesses and sirens, and it's a whole mishmash of all of these immortal creatures. And it doesn't just take place on like Earth. There's different realms and like dimensions open with it. So I enjoyed the Immortals After Dark series, and this one follows Caterin, who is a Valkyrie, and Sebastian, who is a vampire. It's not my favorite in this series, but it does cover a lot of the High Talisman, which is a immortal event that takes place like every 300 years. And it's like an amazing race, but for immortal creatures, put on by a goddess of chaos. So I'm like, all of this sounds like I should be here for it. And it's going through their type of love story. Like I said, it's not my favorite. It's not the greatest, but it's pretty great. It's funny, and it's sad in places that it should be sad. What I don't like a lot with a lot of romance novels is a lot of the times the main characters are, especially with the ones I read a lot lately that aren't from like my little stash of these ones are my comfort ones, are the main character is told to us to be super smart and super capable and super awesome, except when she's around her love interest, and then she's just so stupid and needy. And I'm like, why are you doing this? You told me this was super girl boss, and now you're showing me this. I don't like it. I don't like it. It doesn't make sense. I don't like it. I don't like that as a plot device. Except for here. Except she's not stupid, but a little needy. But it explains in the book. Like, there's an explanation of why she responds and acts the way she does. And even when she does, it's not... It doesn't make me think less of her character. And she is like, she's thousands of years old. And she's meeting Sebastian, who is like 300 years old. And so the age dynamic that plays a lot in romance novels is very switched, but they're immortals, so it's different. I don't know. I enjoy it. It's one of my comfort reads. And not my favorite one of the series, but there's like 20 books in this series, 20 plus-ish books in this series. But it's up there. It's like top 10. 5-ish. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. The fifth book that we listened to, or we read this month, was Dracula by Bram Stoker, you know, classic. And we read this through an audiobook, and the audiobook was 18 and a half hours long. And there are several different audiobook versions of Dracula. The one I happened to get was really good, but it was so slow. So slow. 18 and a half hours. And I'm like, I used to own this book. It's not a thick book. Like 18 and a half hours. But that's because the voice actors are taking dramatic pauses where you would expect a dramatic pause to be taken. And it's also they're talking in different accents and in different ways. So a lot of the times I was just like, you're talking so slow. I understand it. It makes sense with your character, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm losing my thread here of following the story. And so I had to increase it to 1.5 speed for it to, and there's only one character in it that after that made it sound like kind of Alvin and the Chipmunks-ish. But if you do not know the story, this story follows Dracula in the 1800s, where he meets Jonathan Harker and is using him to get a house and travel to London. And this was the first introduction to Dracula, and he goes to London and he finds Jonathan Harker's wife, and you meet Van Helsing, you meet all of these type of iconic characters, and this is their first introductions to it. And after reading this, after like Bright Young Women and No Rest for the Wicked and all of these type of like video essays that I've been listening to, it's very dated because it was written so long ago. So if you're going to read it, like there's a lot of times where this is appropriate for the time. But it's a classic story. It's the first introduction to Dracula. I do love a Dracula story. So I read it. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5, which I'm so excited because I'm finally going to start doing the 0.25s and 0.75s out of 5s because those are available in Storygraph. So 3.75 out of 5. And the sixth book that we read this month was Dracula in Love. So after listening to Dracula, I have 2 other books that have Dracula specifically in them. And I have Dracula in Love, which is the one I read, and then I have Dracula the Undead, and this was written by Dacer Stoker and Ian Holt, and this one is a direct sequel to the first one. And that is Bram Stoker's Descendant. And so I was debating on which one to read. I chose Dracula in Love because I was feeling a little mushy. So Dracula in Love was written by Karen Essex, and I read this physically, and it's about 386 pages. And this is the first book, except told from Mina's perspective. And in the first part of the book, she is writing a letter to her son, telling him that he may know the story that is attached to her and her husband's name, and she wants to tell him the correct story because the original story, which was written by Bram Stoker, he's in this book, was written wrong. And it took the basic story and was twisted, and so it's a retelling of Dracula from Mina's perspective, and I enjoyed this one all the way up until you start getting closer to the end. Once you get closer to the end, it tries to change the lore of Dracula and how he was created, and it makes sense. And they give you like references for it, and so it makes sense. I understand it. I'm just not fully on board for it. And so it's Mina and how she's going through all of the events through the first story, except like Van Helsing's not a good guy. All of the suitors for Lucy were not good men. Well, they were and they weren't. They were not the men that they were presented to be in the original book. Jonathan was not as like committed, I guess, to Mina as he was in the book, in the first book. And it shows how people can be twisted, and there's good characters to people, there's also the bad characters to people. And it was also talking about mental health treatments in that time frame, and especially how that pertains to women, and how women with mental health problems would be put into asylums and that they would be experimented on very tragically, and how all of this kind of fits together. And I enjoyed it. Like I said, more towards the end, I was like, okay, I don't like how you're changing the lore, and I don't like how after the main events towards the end of the book started happening, how Dracula shifted how he was through previously. It makes sense. It makes sense. The book gives you enough like plot and character development that you're like, I understand this. However, me as a grown-ass adult, I'm just like, my dude, how many years did you live? Why? Why? Just communication. Just talk. Let's work through some of these feelings. Why don't you? And he's just like, no. I'm like, all right, you're just another one of them. You're just another one of them. And so that bugged me a bit. But otherwise, overall, I really enjoy the book. I own it. I read it every now and then. Every time I read Dracula, I read one of the two right after. And it's an ongoing thing. I don't read them every year, but like every other year-ish. And I gave it a 4 out of 5. I enjoyed it. And the 7th book that we read this month was Three Assassins. This was written by Kotaro Asaka. I read this digitally and it was 272 pages. And this is the first book in the Assassin series. So a couple of months ago, few months ago, however many months ago, I read Bullet Train, and I read that because I saw the movie on Netflix, and the movie was like based on a book, and I loved the movie, so I read the book, and I love the book way more than the movie. So I found out it was a whole series. So I've been waiting for this book to come up through my library, and it finally did, and I was so excited. I read this, and this follows 3 different people. And just like Bullet Train, most of the people have code names that take on their real names, and that's just kind of how you refer to them. We're following the whale, we're following the cicada, and we are following Suzuki. So we're following them throughout this whole little storyline of it's just all of these mishaps that happened, but brought them all together in a weird like fate way. And it's just like Bullet Train. It's just like Dave Barry novels and movies, and how it's just how all of these small insignificant things that you don't think about just all kind of converge into make a mess in these main storylines. So we follow Suzuki. Suzuki's wife was killed in a car accident years ago, and he is trying to get revenge on the person who killed her. And so he infiltrated an organization to do that. And the whale is an assassin who gets people to unalive themselves, and that's his whole thing. That's his whole thing. And the cicada is also another assassin, and he does very fast, quick type of assassinations, and what he is known for is taking out families. And they're all trying to, well, Suzuki infiltrated the thing, and the person that he wanted to kill, they know what he's doing. Like, the whole organization has been a gangster organization for a while now. They're like, we have you pegged. We know exactly what you're doing. And there is an incident that Suzuki witnesses, and so he is chasing somebody, and the whale witnesses it from a high-rise while he's on a job, and the cicada hears about it while he's on another job, and they just all of their stories converge and like go through, and it was so good. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to spoil anything. It is so great, but yes. And so I definitely want to reread Bullet Train and then go through the next one. And I'm so excited. And there was somebody who was in Bullet Train that was in this one that I really enjoyed, that I was like, I know you. So that was great. I rated this a 4.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it. It was hilarious and wonderfully depressing in places. It was just, this writing from this author is so good. And the 8th book that we read this month was Night of the Mannequins, and this was written by Stephen Graham Jones, and I read this digitally, and this is 128 pages. And this is I enjoy Stephen Graham Jones. Stephen Graham Jones does a lot of horror novels and a lot of Native American horror novels, which I enjoy. I really like so far everything I've read written by him. So this story takes place in an unnamed town and is following a group of teenagers. One who wants to set up a prank on one of his friends in a movie theater because they all watch movies. She's working at a movie theater to pay back her mom for an incident that happened. So they're going to set up a prank. All the other friends are in on it, and this prank involves a mannequin. And the mannequin is set up there, everything. They're like, yes, this prank is set up. It is going to be perfect. The prank doesn't go off the way that they wanted it to. And one of the teenagers swears up and down that he saw that mannequin walk out of the theater on its own volition. So it follows this one kid in how his whole thought process goes through trying to figure out what is going on with this mannequin. And there's some accidents that happen, and there's some murders that happen, and I did not think it was gonna go the way it did, and I was so pleasantly surprised when I did. Like, I was just like, wow. I think I stayed up until late reading that book. So I was just like, I need to know what is going on. And it was really good. It was really just great. It's a shorter novel, so it didn't take too long. Like I said, I really enjoyed it. I rated this a 4 out of 5. And those were the 8 books that we read this month. It was really great. So I pulled up my Storygraph wrap-up. Our average rating this month was 3.75 out of 5, which was really awesome. We read 3 fantasy, 3 thrillers. Like, this is the first month that I think we're going through this that like thriller or horror aren't at the top genres, which was pretty great. But it was so good. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope you guys have an amazing day, night, afternoon, whatever it is, where you are. Don't forget to look in the description. You'll see the link for all of my socials. And I will be putting out TLDRs and videos and all of that on all of these. So don't forget to make sure that you are subscribed, turn on the notifications, like this video, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.